So anyway, so I go to Washington, and what you do in Washington, of course, you go with your priorities for your state. You know, from Maine, you worry about manufacturing and software and shipbuilding and, you know, all of the various, the timber industry, of course. But then you get assigned to committees. And that largely defines where your focus is going to be. And it's somewhat the luck of the draw. Although in my case, I requested to be on the Armed Services Committee because Maine has had a senator on the Armed Services Committee since Margaret Chase Smith in 1950 or 48, with one 6-year period in the 70s. But ever since then, Margaret Chase Smith, Bill Cohen, Susan Collins, and Susan texted me. Susan, by the way, says, I text her more than anyone except her niece. But Susan texted me and as I was coming down, she said, I'm leaving the Armed Services Committee to go to the Appropriations Committee, so you should, you know, do this. So I applied, asked Harry Reid to join the Armed Services Committee, and I said, wherever else you want to put me is fine. But as long as if you give me the Armed Services Committee, I'm okay, you know, just whatever. So I got on the Armed Services Committee, and then I was also on Rules, Budget, and to prove Harry has a sense of humor, Intelligence, which has turned out to be a sort of amazing experience because it has thrust me into the middle of Syria, Iraq, Snowden, CIA, you know, all of the Israel, Palestine, Iran negotiations, all of these issues I've lived for the last 2+ years. So it has been quite an education. And then I've done some traveling. Now, you hear about congressional traveling. I'm not crazy about congressional traveling, but there are 2 reasons to do it. One is you learn something, and the second is it's relationship building. You build relationships with your colleagues that can be very important. So I've taken 4 trips since I've been in office. The first was in the summer of 2013 to Jordan and Turkey with Carl Levin, who is the chair of the Armed Services Committee, just the 2 of us. And then last winter, Tim Kaine and I, Tim Kaine is a senator from Virginia who's on armed services. He's on foreign relations, and I'm on intelligence. So between the 2 of us, we cover the 3 principal committees that deal with foreign affairs. He's an absolutely wonderful guy. So Tim and I went to Israel and Lebanon. And then in October, Tim and I went on another trip to India, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. If you're getting a drift here, it's that I don't go to Paris and London. I only go to the real garden spots. And then just, you heard on the news this morning, King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia died and the Crown Prince Salman is the king. At exactly this time, 1 week ago, I was with Crown Prince Salman in Saudi Arabia. Last Thursday night, because it was Martin Luther King weekend, we had 4 days, John McCain and I and Lindsey Graham and Tim Kaine and Joe Donnelly and John Barrasso, bipartisan group, we left Andrews Air Force Base at 7 at night, Thursday night, got to Saudi Arabia because it's a 13-hour trip, and then because of the time change, it was like 4 in the afternoon on Friday. Spent that evening in Saudi Arabia, all day Saturday in Saudi Arabia, meeting with all kinds of various people, including the Crown Prince. Then in the afternoon, flew to Qatar. Now, I'm going to share something with you that I've learned. I'm going to make you guys the most knowledgeable, cool foreign policy people in Maine. The country Qatar, all my life I've been reading it saying Qatar or something like that. It's gutter, like Gutter, which is one of the most modern cities in the world. And it's a country that has been very cooperative and helpful to us in the air war in Syria against ISIS. The base, I'm not giving away any secrets, the air base where the air war is being conducted from, and we went to it, it looks like a giant video game. And it's very international. The guy who was in charge of the room the day we were there was a Canadian. It's truly a coalition, but that's where they direct the flights into Syria and Iraq. So Qatar is cooperating in that sense, but in that effort. But there have been some questions about which side they've been supporting, and they're private citizens. It's a lot of oil wealth, but I think they're trending more in our direction. And then we went to Israel and met with a whole bunch of Israeli officials, including Benjamin Netanyahu and his opponents. He's engaged in a very tough election campaign. Here's how complicated it is. In Syria, we're on the same side as ISIS, opposed to Assad, Russia, and Iran, except that we worked with Russia to help Assad get rid of his chemical weapons. But then you go to Iraq, and we're on the same side as Iran against ISIS, who's on our side in Syria. You getting this? And then we're on the same side as Iran in Iraq, but we're against Iran in terms of their nuclear program. And in Yemen, you've got Al-Qaeda and a new group called the Houthis, who just took over. And apparently the senior leadership has told us that we're okay, you don't have to abandon your embassy, but the younger guys are shooting at our embassy. Are much deeper and more complicated than, Americans think, well, we're going to go in a few years and fix all this. And it just isn't, it isn't going to happen. So I think one of the lessons is we have to be very clear about what are our interests. Why are we there? And if we can't answer that question very clearly, then probably we shouldn't be there. I think that was one of the mistakes, frankly, of attacking Iraq after September 11th. Because Iraq didn't do September 11th. To me, it was like attacking Brazil after Pearl Harbor. It was a vigorous response, but it didn't have anything to do with what the problem was. Here's a little-known fact. The day before the Falklands War, does anybody remember the Falklands War, Margaret Thatcher? Margaret Thatcher's approval rating in Britain was 23%. The week after the Falklands War, it was 70%. I just hope Putin doesn't know that. Climate change is part of foreign policy. And I keep saying, guys, we have to have a strategy here other than just killing them. Because they're coming back as fast as we're killing them. I remember the Hydra. Remember the Hydra from, Greek mythology? Cut off one head, two grow back. That's what's happening. So yes, we have to act militarily. Yes, we need to try to get them out of Mosul or whatever. But ultimately, there's got to be a much more comprehensive strategy to deal with why are these young men falling for this? Parenthetically, I have to say, the worst mistake we can make as a country is to lump all Muslims into one bucket here. That would be awful. That's what ISIS wants. They want this to be a war between the West, particularly the United States, and Islam. And so it's a matter of finding a policy that I think deals with the very real physical threats, while at the same time deals with the underlying social and political and cultural problems that you outlined. The president announced last week that he's having a summit meeting at the White House in the middle of February on countering extremism around the world, and I've wormed my way into it. I sent him a note and said, I'd like to come, and I just found out an hour ago that I'm going to be there. Because I think I'm the guy who wants to not do it all by drones and weapons. I want to try to figure out how do we de-radicalize people and take the steam out of this movement. So I don't think we're really that far apart, but that's okay. My staff and I talked about this. I said, how do I explain? There's a silly procedure in the Senate called the motion to proceed, which is the motion to start debate on a bill. Mm-hmm. That was the motion to proceed, not the bill, was filibustered. I voted to against the filibuster of the motion to proceed because I wanted to debate the bill. And I'm going to vote against the bill. In other words, I'm planning to vote for all motions to proceed as long as there's going to be an amendment process and a debate. That wasn't the vote on Keystone. That was, I'm very much against it. Again, if you want to YouTube Angus King Energy Committee Keystone, and you'll get an earful of my position on Keystone. So I'm against it, but I'm for open debate in the United States Senate, which we haven't had enough of lately.